As stewards of the people, we should conduct robust oversight into the Office of Personnel Management's pay-setting practices, and we owe the U.S. taxpayer full transparency in this area, as well as assurance that the salaries and benefits provided to our Federal workers are reasonable and appropriate. I note that the debate over Federal employee benefits predated the 1883 enactment of the Pendleton Act overhauling the patronage system, and I am quite confident this debate will outlive the service of our committee. Like all Americans, Federal employees are not immune from our nation's economic and fiscal challenges, and they understand the sacrifices called for in the 2-year pay freeze enacted this past December by Congress and the President. However, we need to be careful not to get caught up in the oversimplistic data comparisons between private sector and Federal jobs. A recent New York Times article pointed out that when comparing private and public sector occupations, the clearest pattern to emerge is an education divide. The most reliable factor in predicting compensation levels is actually the level of compensation, the level of education. And when comparing private and public sector occupations, the clearest pattern to emerge is an education divide, a divide that has grown more pronounced in recent decades. Today's Federal civilian workforce is highly educated, with over half of all Federal employees working in the 9 highest-paying professional occupations in the country. It is also a workforce marked by a declining number of blue-collar workers, dropping from over 30% to just under 9% of the workforce in the last 40 years. So the Federal employees are a more professional level of employee. We've contracted out most of the blue-collar jobs, the lower-paying jobs, which is why you get a discrepancy when comparing Federal employees to the general public. In light of the 2-year pay freeze, which is squeezing the pockets of Federal workers who are also facing ever-escalating health care costs, today I am reintroducing my bill to inject cost transparency into the Federal employees' health benefit programs, contracts between health plans and pharmacy benefit managers. This bill will lower Federal employees' out-of-pocket spending and the program's operational costs, resulting in a win-win for both Federal employees and taxpayers. I look forward to hearing from the distinguished witnesses assembled here today, as your expertise and guidance on compensation issues enables us to better forge a high-performing civil service that is prepared to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Members may have 7 days to submit opening statements and extraneous materials for the record. We will now welcome our first panel, the Honorable John Berry, who is the Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Mr. Berry, pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses must be sworn in before they testify. Please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. Mr. Berry, please limit your opening statement to 5 minutes. We do have your testimony, and we are grateful for that, and we are very grateful for you to be here. You may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Ross, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to be here with you today, and I appreciate the opportunity. I believe that the members of this subcommittee and I and all Federal employees share the goal of making government more efficient while improving services, and I look forward to working together with you to accomplish that. President Obama said it best last week when he said, I quote, "I don't think it does any good when public employees are denigrated or vilified or their rights are infringed upon. We need to attract the best and the brightest to public service. Our times demand it." End quote. Our need for great workers could not be more clear. Federal employees hold lives in their hands and oversee large sums of taxpayer dollars. We need talented and innovative people at the Department of Defense supporting our warfighters. We need great doctors and nurses at our Veterans Hospital doing life-saving work. And we need tough men and women at the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security to protect us from another terrorist attack. And it is just a fact, Mr. Chairman, in order to get these workers, we must provide pay and benefits on par with other large companies for whom we compete with talent. We cannot and should not be the employer of last resort. Despite the complex challenges we face, the Federal civilian workforce is virtually as small today as it has been throughout the modern era. In 1953, there was one Federal worker for every 78 residents. Today, 2009, It was 1 for every 147. President Obama has frozen annual pay adjustments for 2 years. The raw comparisons of average pay between Federal and private sector employees often can ignore important differences between skill levels, complexity of work, scope of responsibility, size of organization, location, experience level, as well as exposure to personal danger. Even comparisons that purport to compare employees in the same occupations can sometimes be misleading. For example, some claim that Federal attorneys make more than private sector attorneys. In fact, while more than half of our general attorneys in the Federal Government earn less than $90,000 in their first year of service, the median first-year salary for comparable attorneys in the private sector is $145,000. As another example, Federal cooks may seem overpaid until you consider that many of them work in our prison system, where they supervise inmates in a very dangerous environment. The Federal Government, like most large employers, also provides an array of benefits. While we need to do this to be competitive, note that these benefits are not free to our employees. Employees share in the cost of those benefits and in many cases pay 100% of the cost. For health benefits, enrollees share 30% of the premium costs. For dental and vision, they pay 100% of the cost. For life insurance, they pay 66% for the basic premium, but 100% for any coverage beyond that. For long-term care, they pay 100%. I'd also like to note that Congress and President Reagan reformed our retirement benefits 25 years ago, and this has avoided the struggles that State and local governments are now going through. Those reforms guarantee that our FERS retirement system is financially sound and fully funded at 100%. Bottom line, this Administration is committed to providing the superior service the American people expect and deserve. Managers and employees who aren't doing that should be held accountable and ultimately fired if they don't improve. There should be no place in the Federal Government for non-performers to hide. Our pay system is not perfect. I have said before, it is 6 decades old and could use a re-examination. We are required by law to reduce all of the comparisons to one average number. This is imperfect and does not reflect the complexity of the workforce. But even so, we must reject misleading uses of data that perpetuate the myth that Federal employees are as a whole overcompensated. They are not. Our wages and our benefits are fair and they are competitive. Any reforms we undertake must meet the following principles that our existing GS system does well: transparency, equal pay for equal work, no political influence, and the ability to recruit and retain the workforce we need. This is how it must be if we are to recruit and retain the best workers and carry out our critical life-saving and life-enhancing missions. Falling behind is unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. I will yield to myself 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Berry, I note that in the President's January 2011 pay agent report, it showed a 22% difference between Federal employee pay and private sector pay. And I was wondering, did that include benefits, that assessment, that report?
No, that is focused specifically just on the pay.
And subsequent to you testifying, we'll have another panel. Mr. Biggs will testify that Federal pay premium of 14%, and when combined with benefits premium of 33%, total Federal salary and benefits are really nearly 25% above those of similar private sector employees. And Mr. Shirk will testify that Federal employees earn a total compensation of 30 to 40% greater comparable than private sector workers. Do you agree with their findings?
Absolutely not.
And why not? I mean, because in one sense we're talking about strictly compensation, and the other we're talking about compensation and benefits.
If we'll stay for compensation for a second, Mr. Chairman, I agree. I'm happy to look at them together. But for purposes of this discussion, it's easier if we can keep them separate for a moment. Their comparisons are based on gross averages. As Congressman Lynch mentioned, the Federal workforce is now a very skilled, white-collar, high-sophisticated workforce. It used to be 40 years ago, over a third of our workforce was blue-collar. Less than 10% is today. And So we need to compare the Federal Government with like to like. What the Bureau of Labor Statistics does in the Department of Commerce is they go into literally every locality, every one of your states in the country, and they will compare entry-level, mid-level, and senior-level career for each position. So they will look at an engineer, for example. They will find a job in the private sector that is almost duplicative. And the private sector doesn't use the GS system. So you can imagine this is very exhaustive, it's expensive, it takes a lot of work. The work that you are going to hear from in the next panel, they don't have the resources to do that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does that on an annual basis for us, and that's the data we are comparing. So we are getting real comparison of like jobs to like jobs. The averages you are going to hear about from that panel are looking at the total labor force of the civilian market. The primary jobs in the private sector are retail clerks and service workers, waiters and waitresses. We don't have those in the Federal Government. And those that we do are generally provided on a contract basis with the private sector. So that average, you can see, pulls down the private sector number. But when you compare engineer to engineer, lawyer to lawyer, doctor to doctor, nurse to nurse, what it shows consistently for 20 years is that Federal employees lag the private sector.
But wouldn't you also agree, because I don't believe OPM considers the job security as a criteria when determining the value of a job. Is that correct?
No, sir. Obviously, working in the Federal Government, our mission is long-term in nature. And
it should be for any employment. I mean, people go into employment for careers and not to change jobs through a revolving door. And I guess my question is that when you look at fiscal year 2010, the quit rate for GS employees was 1.5%, and the layoff rate was 0.37%. And do you have any opinion as to how that would compare to the private sector?
Our attrition rates pretty much track the private sector. I have heard some misinformation from some folks talking about that the Federal Government doesn't have a retention problem. Let me just give you doctors and nurses. In 2005, we hired 5,300 of them. As of today, we have lost 2,300 for a quit rate of over 43%. I have a retention problem. And that is primarily based when we are talking to employees as they leave. One of the biggest and leading concerns is the fact that they are underpaid.
But again, speaking as the whole Federal workforce, we are only looking at a 1.5% quit rate. I mean, so I wouldn't consider that to be so much of a problem. If it was 40% as a total of the entire workforce, then I would consider it a problem. But let me ask you, you talked about highly skilled occupations such as engineers and lawyers being paid below the market. Are there any circumstances or instances where Federal employees are paid above the market?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. I mean, the average, when I say, I do not mean to represent, when I say the 22% pay gap that the Department of Labor references doesn't apply to each and every job or each and every employee. That's a gross average, which means some employees are paid more, some are paid less, some are paid the same. Clearly, to get that number of the gap, the clear majority are paid less. There are some that are paid more.
Real quickly, I've just got a couple of seconds. How many days of paid leave are Federal employees entitled to? And do you know?
We can give you, it varies based on years of service, Mr. Chairman. So if I could, I'll just provide that to you for the record.
Okay. Thank you.
You'll have it exactly.
Thank you. When I see my time's up, I'll now recognize the distinguished gentleman and ranking member from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director Berry. I want to thank you for the good work you're doing over there. One of the things I just want to start out by pointing out is I noticed behind me there's a chart here, employment changes, that the Federal Government added 157,000 jobs. I just want to, now this is 2008 to 2010. Now you would think that meant that employment at in the Federal sector actually went up. I went back and I got the numbers because I was surprised by that number, and I went back and actually calculated the number of separations, the number of people who left the Federal Government. We had 206,000, almost 207,000 leave in 2010, 90,000 in 2009, just over 90,000, and 219,000 in 2008, for a total separation of 616,359 employees. So while they're saying there's 157,000 new first-time employees